I don't know much about Higurashi GOU, but I'm hoping we can get them to Higurashi go to the polls. So I know I'm like 5 years late to this discussion, but I watched Gou Sotsu recently for the first time a few months back, and well, they were not lying. This has got to be one of the experiences of all time. I went into Gou Sotsu genuinely curious about what it was going to add to the wonderful world of Higu. This is one of those anime you inevitably hear people's strong opinions about, and by the time I finished Sotsu, I knew exactly why. Some background before we get into it proper. Higurashi no Naku Kuro ni, or When the Cicadas Cry, is one of the best visual novels. Well, stories in general, actually. It's got twists and beats that literally had me on my knees crying, then immediately convulsing with anger at what these funny-looking schmucks get up to. It's good stuff if you're not skill-gapped by the art style, but it's also long, over 1 million words. As such, the past anime adaptation by Studio Dean, notable for producing the only good Fate Stay Night anime, struggled a bit to cram it into the measly 60-ish episodes they produced over their 10-year adapting. Dean has a flawed Higurashi anime, especially in the answer arcs, which can feel positively breakneck, but it's by no means bad. It just feels a tad rushed, and the art style never seemed to find its footing until literally the last OVA they made. If you think about it though, having a scuffed art style makes it more faithful. All this to say, when I heard about a new Higurashi anime coming down the line, this time animated by Passion, known for Rail Wars Citrus and interspecies reviewers, wow, some real gooners in the studio. Point is, it sounded promising. Regardless of what you think about the aforementioned works, Passion does some pretty looking shows. Their new take of Higurashi seemed to follow suit. For all I will say about this series going forward, its art style is still really f***ing good. That's one thing no one can take away from it. The original Higurashi sprites are still better though. F*** you, fight me. Now, in 2020, while I was also vaguely following the news of the upcoming anime, I was also, reading Higurashi for the first time. I'd seen the Dean anime as a kid in those 3 parts per episode comps YouTube used to have in the olden times, and retrospect seeing that at 7 explains a lot about me now, but this was my first real dive into the story proper at a time when I could actually appreciate it. In keeping with what I said earlier, Higurashi blew me away. If I could erase my memories of any story and re-experience it for the first time, well, I'd choose Tsukihime, but this is a close second. As I was reading Higu and following along with the release of the upcoming anime though, one thing in particular stuck out. That being the interviews with the author of Higurashi, Ryukishi 07, stating how this new anime wasn't a flat adaptation, but a new take on Higurashi entirely. How fans, both old and new, could come and enjoy this new series. Which was an exciting sentiment, and makes more sense to do than one might think. One of the biggest flaws with the Dean anime was, again, it struggling to cram all of Higu into the anime format. This new Higurashi story being tailor-made to fit within the confines of an anime is just about the best way I could think to tackle a show based on such a massive source. Unless you really commit to the bit and do 100+ episodes, which has its own cavalcade of problems both logistically and culturally. People stray from Higurashi because it's 1 million words long. Having a similar length anime isn't likely to convince those folk to tune in. The way Gou Sotsu was proposed though, you get people watching who maybe don't want to read a VN or watch the old crusty Dean anime. You also get returning viewers who are curious to see what it's about. Truly, it's the best of all worlds here. Higurashi has always had a comfy, if small, place in the wider anime community. This to me seemed like a cool way for one of my favorites to branch out and become more popular. Naturally as well, any worries one would have about a new take were assuaged because Ryukishi 07 was working on the show himself. Who better to do a new take on Higurashi than the guy who wrote it in the first place? The art, the bold new direction, and the writer all came together. Higurashi Gou Sotsu sounded like a slam dunk from its inception. But then, as more and more episodes started rolling out, the hopeful optimism surrounding the lead-up swiftly faded. Go wasn't what anyone was led to believe. Despite being a quote-unquote different take on the story friendly to newcomers and Higu veterans alike, Gou's initial episodes were more or less just the Dean anime with a new coat of paint and twice the fan service. Man, don't you just hate it when you fall off your bike? Hearing that was kinda disappointing, but not all around bad. I mean, I liked the Dean anime, but if Go was similar, putting it off for even longer sounded fine. I'd get to it one day, but still reading the VN at the time, I didn't feel all too compelled to watch what I had basically just finished reading. Fast forward to mid-2021, the second season named Sotsu started airing, and oh my god, the reception to this one was far more vitriolic. This was one of those you just had to be there moments, but there were long time when they cry fans who outright despised Sotsu. I'm talking they sweared off Ryukishi's future works on principle because of what it did to the legacy of Higurashi. At the same time, however, there were defenders of it who adamantly stated, no, look, the show's good if you've read all of Higurashi, Umineko, and Sakonia. Trust me, guys. Which is a crazy-ass statement to make about a show that was supposed to be beginner-friendly, but nevertheless, people stood by it. Sotsu divided the fanbase like I've never seen before with any other fandom. Doomed Yuri folk adored it, plotheads hated it, and though I didn't watch the show at the time myself, I found it all incredibly fascinating. I should note, by far my favorite character in Higurashi is Satoko. Her arc of learning to ask for help, to not always put on a strong front while crumbling inside, speaks to me in a way few other things have. If you know anything about Sotsu, even just based on its teaser images, it's that it involves Satoko heavily and does some interesting stuff with her. I, though not having been spoiled explicitly, knew that some shady shit went down with her, and that kinda repulsed me away from Sotsu more than anything. Every character in Higou has a satisfying arc, but Satoko's to me was one that felt truly complete. To reopen that Catbox and play around with the contents, maybe even spell them out fully, sounded foolhardy. Outside of those reasons, though, I'm not gonna lie, I also wanted to see what those superfans who had read every work and were ride and die for Sotsu were on about, so I decided I'd read Umineko at least before jumping into Gou Sotsu. Umineko is longer than the Bible, so that took a while. Flash forward to late last year, I had finished Umineko months ago and forgotten about Gou Sotsu entirely. It wasn't until out of the blue, me and one of my longtime internet pals, Axel, started chatting about Higou, and the topic of Gou Sotsu came up. He had seen it around when it came out and wanted to, for some reason, rewatch it to see if it was better on a second go-around. I also, now years removed from its initial release, was curious enough to finally dive in and learn what everyone was on about. So I said, sure, let's watch it. With all that in mind, we fired up Sync Play and got to it, and wow, just wow. This anime is one of the worst experiences I've ever had. I didn't know by new take friendly to beginners that Ryukishi actually meant pissing on Oyashiro-sama's grave. And you better know who that is beforehand in explicit terms or you're gonna be f***ing lost watching this show. Let's start with Go. Right off the bat, Go is just confusing in how it's structured. The first 13 episodes of its 24-episode run are dedicated to recaps of past Higurashi arcs. But as opposed to inner monologues or subtle hints in the details of what's said, the characters in Go convey their sadistic, f***ed-up dark predilections by staring into the camera with vicious, glowing red eyes. I half expected Rena to start twisting Keiichi's arm off the first time I saw this. I knew Ryukishi was inspired by Type Moon, but not like this. Half of this show feels like it's made up of blank-faced stares with the occasional Rena.exe popping up. It's really jarring, like those videos of Death Note without the inner monologues. The second notable thing about these initial 13 episodes is that the only thing that changes in this new take is that there is now a random ass plot twist at the end. The arcs in Go are ripped straight out of the VN, so we have some pretty clear parallels to make to the source here. In the first arc, for instance, instead of Keiichi snapping and lashing out, he has a talk with Rika and trusts his friends again, yay. But whoops, he should have been paranoid because Rena had the red eyes and is the one that lashes. Which leads me into two things. One, I don't care what anyone says. This and all subsequent twist ends have no build-up in Go. Well, unless you count the characters weirdly staring into the camera for 5 seconds as foreshadowing. But I don't, because Higurashi has been known to do some weird stuff with perspective. In the visual novel and Dean anime, Rena has some strange moments of staring daggers at Keiichi. That's because Keiichi was paranoid and reading into things that weren't there. Half the story is him psyching himself out over a nasty rumor he heard. A good example of that is Keiichi thinking that Rena put a needle into his food when really it was just a weird hard bit. He loses his mind because he's on edge and is therefore an unreliable narrator. The story is from his perspective, so the reader has to learn to separate fact from the protagonist's strong biases. It's really engaging writing for a mystery, but Go is flat out saying here to take everything literal with no thoughts because Keiichi was justified in thinking Rena was an evil knife guy. I get that maybe the point of these twists is to psych out longtime fans, but I still think it's dumb if you don't set it up anytime. The first arc I could kinda get throwing that wrench, but this twist bullshit repeats itself 3 times in the exact same way. No build up, just I'm gonna murder now. As for my second thing about this scene though, man, I grew up with people talking about how uber violent the Dean anime was, but that is outright subtle compared to this. Just look at this scene. It's so incredibly gratuitous that it's not even impactful. It jumps from shocking all the way to parody. When I saw this for the first time, I burst out laughing because it felt like a shitty creepypasta with a budget. Was half expecting some hyper-realistic blood to pop up. It's so damn goofy and overplayed, like none of this is edited. I'm showing you the scene. I might speed it up a little bit in the edit, but this is what happens. They hit each other that much, and by the way, Keiichi lives through this somehow, but Rena doesn't? That's some main character bullshit right there. Not to be a Dean dick rider, but that anime did the violence in Higurashi way more justice. It had its moments of hyperviolence, the Rika knife scene comes to mind, but it also has stuff like the fingernail scene, which honestly makes me cringe to even think about now. Having to look at it for editing is gonna suck, but it's that very reason it's a good example of how Dean did it better. Higurashi is a story with some gore in it. Showing that in an anime that's even pretending to be faithful is arguably vital. So you know, how you go about it is important. Basically every scene Gou Sotsu has with blood in it follows this one's trend though. It's not subtle at all, it's always overplayed and in your face and super extreme, and it kinda sucks too because one of the biggest things people write off Higurashi for is being a senseless Guro fest. Which isn't true, but Go seems to want to play into that reputation instead of debunk it. That's more or less it for the first 13 episodes. Just lame recaps with unsatisfying Disney villain-ass twists. Honestly, if you're gonna watch Gou Sotsu for whatever reason, I'd unironically skip these episodes. They are legit pointless to the rest of the show, especially because of Sotsu, but we'll get into that. By the way, past this point in the video, I'd recommend being pretty familiar with Higurashi. I'm gonna start talking about plot points both in the VN and in Gou Sotsu in a pretty spoiler-heavy manner, so bear that in mind lest ye be lost. If you're heading out here though, here's some parting advice. If you're Higu curious, might I recommend instead of a 60-episode scuffed adaptation or the tragedy that is Gou Sotsu that you watch Higurashi Kira. It's the shortest Higurashi anime and it's the real beginner-friendly show. Watch it with your parents, watch it with your kids, get the whole family together, let me know how that goes. Moving on from the useless 13, we get into what is actually the best part of Gou Sotsu, which is Rika taking center stage and being utterly mortified. This is also, however, where the show throws out any semblance of being beginner-friendly. I think that might have just been thrown out there to get more eyes on the anime because it is blatantly a lie. See, Gou Sotsu is actually a sequel series to the original Higurashi, and if you haven't read it, you will be lost to watching this. And that said, it being a sequel actually has many interesting implications now and awful ones later. As for now, though, we have Rika waking up back in 1983, utterly perplexed as to how she arrived back into the nightmare she had finally escaped from in the visual novel proper, which is an incredibly interesting idea, honestly. Taking a Rika who has completed her journey back to the start while cruel to her character has the chance to unlock some pretty interesting interactions. It's like a New Game Plus save file, IRL. Rika has all the pieces that got her to her future, it's just a matter of using them to get there again. This part of the show, going through the 5 loops Rika gives herself before giving up completely and ending it all, is legitimately engaging. While watching, I was wondering how Rika ended up here again, what she would do to get through the dice game of Hinamizawa with a loaded die. It's really good stuff for about an episode. But then we get to episode 15 and this little scene happens. It was at this precise moment that I started giggling at the absurdity and accepted that Go, at the very least, was an anime that's so bad it's good. The same traits of hyperviolence and thick-in-the-head plot structure continue to pervade and arguably grow exponentially from this point on. The rest of Go seems to exist, save for the last episode, to be torture porn for Rika haters. Poor girl goes through so much nonsense in these episodes. Deaths, losing Hanyu, contemplating the lyrics of One Last Breath by Creed, and it all comes together to form this unhomogenized amalgamation of slop. I had to try and turn my brain off to even attempt to enjoy Go. And it's so bad it's good since it's vaguely fun, but to engage with it on any level above that is folly. Never thought I'd say it, but it made me miss reading the console arcs dearly. You know, that one with Rena, Sion, and Keiichi teaming up to kill Satoko's uncle? That one was pretty good. That one was pretty fun. It kills me because Go increasingly had interesting moments and ideas it just did nada with. Akasaka coming back unexpectedly, the whole inner world of fragments, and I've already mentioned how Rika going back to 83 is a fun idea. On that last one, though, there's something interesting about it. Rika being sent back after achieving her perfect future. If that sounds familiar to you, and it certainly did to me as I was watching, it's because that's the plot of the epilogue chapter of Higurashi called Psycho Goroshi. In that story, Rika gets hit by a bus and gets sent back to the past, but in a Hinamizawa that's different. Everything just seemed to work out in this timeline. Satoshi is still around, Rika's mother is alive, and Rika is relatively friendless as she's never had to reach out to anyone. In this chapter, she's faced with the dilemma of living in the new world she's found herself in where nothing bad happened to anyone, or killing her mother in a ritual to return to the future she fought so hard for. Psycho Goroshi fucks, honestly. In more ways than just its premise, it takes the concepts Go put forward and actually uses them in a satisfying way, which is odd because it came years before Go and was written by the same guy. It's also doubly odd because Go simply treats Psycho Goroshi as if it doesn't exist. I guess it's a timeline split or something? I don't know. You can either go Gou Sotsu or Psycho. Shit's GT and Super all over again. To end this section, Go's last bootleg-ass arc ends the same way the rest of them have, with a twist ending that doesn't feel built up to at all. I get that this is the question arc part of the anime, but that doesn't mean literally only making the viewer ask questions. Oh, Satoko, what have they done to you, my girl? You know, despite all my complaining, Go is still the best part of this duology. I could at least argue the merits of Go. It had some fun, rehashed concepts, you know? But Sotsu ruined my marriage. My marriage to Satoko as a character, I guess. Look, I thought of the title for this video before anything else, and I can't think of any other way to tie it in. I couldn't title it anything like Gou Sotsu Ruined My Life. I mean, Kexi makes videos with that moniker. I am many things, but I ain't no hack. But you know, I guess marriage works because if this shit's canon, Satoko shoots from top 1 to top none. Sotsu opens, like with its sister series, with a bunch of recaps of prior arcs we've already seen before. This time going over the useless 13 of Go with the answer key that Satoko was waltzing around injecting people with gooner juice, aka H115 or whatever the Hinamizawa syndrome inducer thingy was called. Yes, these are the exact same episodes with a scant few additional scenes of Satoko acting spooky once in a blue moon. This did not need to be dedicated to multiple episodes. This could have been a fucking montage. A 5-minute montage. Jeez, I would unironically rather watch the Endless 8 than the show again. At least Haruhi changes duds in that. Anyhow, Satoko has seemingly lost it and is doing all this for reasons you don't know at the start of Sotsu. Quick little correction, so Satoko's backstory is in Go, but when I was writing the script, my brain put that in Sotsu for some reason because I associate Sotsu with Satoko, but Satoko Goroshi, the arc with Satoko's backstory, is in Go. Just wanted to clarify that real quick, unless someone correct me in the comments. Everything I said still holds true though, the show sucks. And for reasons that make even less sense by the end of it. See, Satoko, Rika's best friend mind you, was really bad at school. She didn't like studying to get better either. Additionally, once they got into a fancy high school, Rika and Satoko started drifting apart. Despite, it literally being Satoko's ego, which has somehow regressed to levels worse than pre-Higurashi, causing that rift. As a result of this, Satoko gets really mad and really upset, and on a trip back to Hinamizawa finds an artifact that was just kind of in a shrine. Said artifact lets her kill Rika, then herself, thus looping both back to 1983, throwing her best friend right back into the source of all her trauma despite also learning about Rika's looping adventures. All to try and convince her friend to not leave for the fancy high school because it's too hard for her. Satoko doesn't even think twice upon finding this relic, she just starts stabbing. After all, according to Satoko, it's justified because Rika betrayed her by having a life outside of her. Gee, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember this toxic aspect of Satoko's character in the original Higurashi. In fact, I remember one of the most striking and evocative scenes in Higurashi being her actively refuting such toxic dependency, but what do I know? I didn't write the f***ing thing. To simplify without all my yammering, Satoko was turned into the main, sadistically evil villain, arguably worse than Takano, because she was bad at studying. Satoko kills Rika because she hates studying. Broly and Dragon Ball Z had a better fucking motivation. I can't get over it. I can't get over the impetus for everything in this show being so fucking stupid. You're telling me this Satoko would do any of this, would regress to a point that's worse than any time shown in Higurashi, literally more devolved than her calling CPS for made-up reasons. I refuse to believe it. Ryukishi has to be trolling us with this. Ain't no way this man wrote over 1 million words of Higurashi going into painstaking detail about every character for him to forget the characterization he wrote this badly. Satoko liked to play pranks on people in Higurashi. Maybe they went a little far once or twice, but she never killed anyone for slighting her. You can't even argue that it's the Hinamizawa syndrome affecting her, as there is explicitly a scene that says Satoko's cured. Why does that scene exist? What point does this serve? I just don't fucking get it. But if I think about it really hard, maybe I do get it. And this is where the pointless Umineko tie-ins come in. This is Burnt Castle and Lambda Delta. If they look familiar, that's because they're meant to be Rika and Satoko in the form of witches. Umineko is a whole other thing, but given how Burn and Lambda are, I can only surmise that Gou Sotsu exist to explain how the two got to that point, and how they know who Aurora is, who, as an aside, is just kinda here in Gou Sotsu for some unexplained reason. I clocked her immediately in the opening and remember thinking, ain't no way this show's about to do something that stupid. And oh, to be naive again. Aurora talks with Satoko a lot. She's basically Satoko's Hanyu, but other than being a wall for Satoko to exposit at, she's just here doing her usual spiel of speaking in riddles and being a self-insert for Ryukishi. Literally, if Gou Sotsu has another purpose other than being an extremely hand-fisted origin story for Burn and Lambda, I don't know what it is, because it certainly wasn't a fun time. Honestly, I don't know if watching the show has made Higurashi or Umineko worse. It's hard to say, because sure, it ruined Rika and Satoko's characters in Higurashi, but if this is where Burn and Lambda come from in Umineko, those characters just kinda suck now, don't they? After watching Gou Sotsu, me and my pal Axel wondered why we even devoted the time to it. I knew I was probably gonna make a video about halfway through Go, but that was about it. As for deeper meaning in the show, figuring out what Ryukishi was trying to say with this one, it's a bit harder to find an answer outside of what I just posited. I want to believe there's something I'm not seeing, and if you like this show, by all means, please do explain why in the comments. I know I've been really forward this video, but I am legitimately curious because I found nothing but cool here. A sentiment I hold even stronger having read more When They Cry works because it kinda sours what I held true within my heart. With regards to the Lambda burn stuff especially. See, though it's not as explicit as Satoko and Rika literally saying the thing Burn and Lambda do to each other, a better version of Rika, at least, ending up as Burn Castle is detailed in, you guessed it, Psycho Giroshi. Rika, when faced with the dilemma she has in that story, contemplates while drinking a bottle of wine the possibility of being trapped in fragments forever. In her stupor, she talks about becoming a witch of miracles, gallivanting around from fragment to fragment. The wine she partakes in that scene literally being called Burn Castle. While reading Umineko, I always personally considered Psycho Giroshi's bad and unseen end to be what leads to Burn, with Satoko eventually going along the same witchy way looking for Rika. That's the doomed Yuri storyline I made up in my head and could really get behind, but I guess actually connecting the dots myself wasn't good enough. Better to lay it all out in explicit terms which suck all the way through to experience. What fun are Catboxes anyways? Isn't dragging out the guts of truth way more fun? Maybe that's what Gou Sotsu is. Ryukishi saying that some details are best left up to interpretation because if they're explored, they'll never live up to what you had in your head. The concepts one imagines with regards to a work sometimes never live up to what's actually in that work. And that twisted logic, maybe I can accept this series as a meta cautionary tale. It makes sense if I really think about it. I just wish it didn't come at the cost of characters I loved. For years and years, people wondered how Burn Castle and Lambda Delta came to be, and now we know. Curiosity truly killed the cat. You see, that's a layered joke because in Umineko, Burn Castle is referred to as a Gou Sotsu is fanfic creepypasta incarnate. Go read Psycho Giroshi instead if you like the concept of it though. It's literally shorter to read than Gou Sotsu, a better experience, and cost way less than the Blu-rays. Conversely, you could watch the Dean adaptation of Psycho. It's also pretty good. Thank you for watching this far in. I hope my review / kind of analysis of Gou Sotsu was entertaining. I didn't think I'd be making this video, but one evening I sat down and it just started pouring out of me, so truly a passion project. If you like this kind of video, please do let me know because it was a lot of fun to write. Like, subscribe, and comment Satoko toes if you made it this far into the video. Patreon.com if you want to support me. See you all next time. Sleepy out.